My Hero Academia, Chapter 233, Bright Futures. This was another great chapter. I'm always saying it, but come on guys, Horikoshi has been on fire with this arc. But this chapter especially, I really enjoyed a lot of reveals in it, and you know I love that stuff. So let's get into it. So it opens up with us seeing what the original Twice has been up to since the Sad Man's Parade activated, I guess you want to say. Because I think since then we've just been following the respective of the clones and whatnot. And as we assumed, he's been helping Toga and trying to get her to recuperate. But I really like how he's going about it, and it's just further showing us how busted Twice's Quirk is, but also how much of an asset he is to the League of Villains due to the multifacetedness of it, because he's also playing medic here, and I really like this whole sequence because he's cloning Toga in order to use her clone to give her original body a blood transfusion. This is genius from Horikoshi. I wouldn't have thought about this, and I'm sure maybe some of you guys was, but I think this is so cool. But we're also, you know, I think it's really interesting that we're getting so much explanation on Twice's quirk. Because like every other chapter or so for the past few, we just keep getting more and more clarification on Twice's quirk and further explaining like the rules and whatnot. And it's either because we're genuinely being educated here because of how multifaceted it is, like I said, or this might mean that this quirk is going to be used against the League of Villains. I mean, at least inadvertently, one way or another, because we have to go back a few chapters when we found out from Skeptic, or whoever said it, that they wanted to use Twice's quirk on Re-Destro. So either that was just Chekhov's gun letting us know what's going to happen in the future, or it was just a red herring. But it also is odd how his interaction with Skeptic, who we see is like completely insane in this chapter. But as I was saying, Skeptic might legitimately defeat or just overcome Twice in this sequence and then force him to use his quirk against the League for the Liberation Army's benefit. So then it cuts to Spinner taking on Hanabata, which has kind of been touched on here and there throughout the arc, but now it's just like full-blown, it's Spinner versus Hanabata, and we're getting Hanabata's liberation code, or his villain name, which is Trumpet. Very cool, it makes sense. And also his wrist bracelet things that he has were able to form the mask that he wears, the Seventh Loud, or I think that's what it's called. And this is like nanotech-ish, right? I mean, it looks like it's nanotech-y, and I was talking about nanotech in the previous chapter, as I was wrong regarding to Re-Destro. Well, we'll get into that later, of course. But at least it seems that the Liberation Army does have nanotech, so that's kind of cool. Or at least this is how I see it. But we're also getting the clarification of his quirk, and I assume that it was this, based on the hints and everything that we got in the previous chapters. And as I said before, he more or less does have Bello Betty's Devil Fruit ability from One Piece. And I also drew the comparison that Bello Betty is also a part of the Revolutionary Army in One Piece, which has a very similar goal to what the Liberation Army does have in My Hero. But of course, one group is evil and the other isn't. But I do like the explanation of Trumpet's quirk here, which is called Incitement. And apparently he can send out these special electromagnetic waves from his voice that essentially buffs everyone, gives them a physical and mental boost. But the interesting little fact here is that they need to be accepting of it. Or as it's stated, they need to open their hearts to him. So I guess this means that he just can't run up to anybody and give them a buff off of his voice. But I also like that the louder his voice is, the stronger the vibrations are in the air, so the effect will become bigger, which leads to him putting on the amplification mask that he has. I think this is super cool. But aside from this, we're getting a gigantic reveal. And maybe it's just me, but it was done like rather nonchalantly in this chapter. I'm talking about the reveal of Spinner's quirk, of course, which we always have been talking about. We're always curious, like, what is Spinner's quirk? Does he have a quirk? Why have they been keeping it secret for so long? I mean, it's been years and years since they have not talked about Spinner's quirk or him even having it and whatnot. So we find out it's Gecko. It's just called Gecko. And I'm going to assume that this is very similar to what Tsuyu's quirk is. As we saw that, like, her quirk is just, she could do whatever a frog could do. And I guess Spinner could do whatever a gecko can do. But it seems like he got the worst end of the stick here, as where he just went full heteromorphic with his gecko quirk, as where Tsuyu only really got like big hands and the tongue. But, you know, she got to keep all of her other humanly kawaii features. So it seems like the main ability of this quirk is that he could just stick to walls and move on them and whatnot, and that's kind of cool. But I looked up other abilities that geckos have just to see if it maybe is going to pertain to him in the future when we further see more of what he's capable of. And it doesn't really seem like geckos can really do all that much, but I'm sure Horikoshi is going to ham it up the way that he hams up Tsuyu's ability. So what I was able to find real quick is that geckos have like a better vision of low light than humans, but it only really applies to when the moon is out, more or less, so maybe that's going to amplify his vision. But aside from that, the other significant abilities of a gecko comes from its tail, which Spinner doesn't have, or at least we don't see a tail. Maybe he has it like tucked, so it makes him more streamlined and he fits in more without sticking out as much, because we know that he was bullied over him being a heteromorphic. But the tail that the geckos do have gives them really good balance. Like if a gecko is falling, it can use its tail to balance itself out and land on its feet, kind of like a cat. But also if the gecko loses its tail, it can grow it back. So maybe this means Spinner has like a regeneration ability. Maybe like a Namekian from Dragon Ball. Like maybe it's not just his tail, but maybe like if his arm or his leg gets cut off, he can grow it back. That can be pretty realistic for him. I could see that happening. But then we're also getting more into Spinner's backstory, and man, I really feel for the guy. Like before this, I was kind of ambivalent towards him. I mean, mainly because we didn't really get much development on him. We didn't really know much about him, but now that we're finding out, like, oh yeah, I mean, he was of course bullied and it forced him to be a quote-unquote hikikomori, you know, like a shut-in gamer. And he didn't really have any goals or motivations until, of course, he discovered Stain. And then, as it says, it set a fire in his heart, and that gave him motivation to do something because he wanted to live out Stain's will. Like, if he couldn't live out his own will, he was going to live out somebody else's. And that's also showing us how he truly feels about Shigaraki. So if we go back a few chapters before, which it actually shows as a flashback of, when Tomura is like, let's destroy everything, that's what my ultimate goal is. We saw like an odd response from Spinner there, and some of us thought that, you know, maybe that was showing that Spinner was conflicted with his involvement with the League of Villains here, like maybe he got a little in over his head. But we're seeing like, no, that was a red herring. In fact, that made Spinner double down on it, and that he wants to see Shigaraki's future and visions, and he'll do anything that he needs to do in order to make that happen. So Spinner is just fully embracing this whole thing about him just living out other people's goals and helping them achieve them, because that, in a way, is his goal and his motivation to go further in life. And this is just the dichotomy between Spinner and Trumpet here, because Trumpet is one who inspires and motivates others, as where Spinner is one who is inspired and motivated by others. So I really like that. And it's just a recurring theme in this arc so far between the League of Villains against the Liberation Army. Like, Twice and Skeptic have similar abilities. Tomura and Re-Destro have similar roles and motivations. And now we're just seeing that Spinner, Hanabata have a similar relationship. Oh, and of course, we can't forget about the whole fire and ice between Getten and Dabi, of course. So then that brings us to where Chapter 232 left off, with the building coming down, and we just see Tomura and Re-Destro just standing there. And I love how Tomura is just standing right in front of him, like, not really afraid at all. When he sees this huge hulking guy above him, he's like, were you always that big? And also, this further clarifies Re-Destro's ability to grow his entire body. I forgot to mention that we actually do see kind of a panel of his hulking form at the end of Chapter 232. Oh, and of course, it's revealing that Giran was able to survive the tower collapsing. I think that would have been hilarious and dark if Giran just died in this arc by the hands of the League of Villains, even though they were like kind of trying to save him. it was really up in the air what Tomura's motivations were here. I mean, of course, I know that he was trying to take down the Liberation Army because he was kind of forced to, but we were really unsure if he really cared about saving Gearing or whatnot. We know that Twice was, but I also Twice used his clones as like a crash bag to support Gearing in the fall, so that's how he's able to survive, and I like it. So then Shigaraki attacks Re-Destro using his decay quirk on the ground and like sending it at him. This is like a page out of Chisaki's book here, the way that he's using his quirk. But it's also showing us that like Re-Destro's quirk amplifies his agility because he's able to like jump out of it instantly. But also little interesting thing here. Now maybe Tomura has done this before in the series. I personally don't remember him like touching the ground and sending his decay quirk at someone that way. But he is able to do this in the One Justice video game. And also, Toga is able to use the quirks of the people that she copies in One Justice as well. So, One Justice was a little ahead of its time. Oh, and it's further clarifying that Shigaraki's quirk has somewhat evolved or just developed further because it's further spreading, like what we saw before. Like, him just touching someone wasn't enough. If someone is like in the vicinity of the things that he's touching, or if it can spread to somewhere else, it will further affect things, because when he does use his decay quirk on the ground, it spreads even to his own sneakers and starts to decaying them as well. So that's pretty cool. But then of course we see that Re-Destro is not playing around, and like instantly he tries to like smash Shigaraki. But fortunately enough, Shigaraki has been practicing this for like a month and a half straight with Gigantomachia, because Gigantomachia has been doing very similar attacks to him, you know, very similar approach to battle that Re-Destro has here. So lucky for Shigaraki that he came prepared, because if he didn't, this likely would have been the death of him. But then, in a big surprise to me, Tomura is losing half of his hand in this exchange here, in a pretty gruesome panel that we're seeing. And this is definitely setting back Tomura big time, because of course his quirk is relying on him making contact with all 5 fingers. So this of course isn't completely nerfing Tomura. He still has access to his right hand, but it remains to be seen if he could still use his quirk with his left hand, because like I said, he needs to make contact with all 5 fingers. So now that he is missing 3 of his fingers, does that mean that he can't use his quirk with his left hand anymore? Or now that he just has 2 fingers, all he needs to do is make contact with them? It remains to be seen, of course, but damn. So at this point, I'm sure some of you were wondering or trying to come up with some kind of theory as to how Tomura is going to recover from this, or if he's even going to recover from it at all, because if he doesn't somehow repair his hand, then he's just going to have a major setback for the rest of the series until, you know, towards the end. And I've come up with kind of a theory of how he could fix this. So let us go back to the beginning of the chapter, when Twice cloned Toga to perform a blood transfusion on her with the clone. So maybe Twice can clone Shigaraki here, and maybe take the 3 missing fingers from the clone, and then reattach them to the current Shigaraki. I know there's a lot of issues that come with that, like, would removing the 3 fingers equate to breaking a bone, making the clone just dissolve? Or would the operation activate that? You know, it's just a theory. It's one of the possibilities, of course. But other than that, I just see like him getting robotic replacements, kind of like how Mr. Compress did. Or maybe Dr. Yujiko can like regrow his hand or something like that. Or maybe like grow an artificial one and reattach it, and it makes his quirk work. It totally seems like something Yujiko could do, because at this point it really seems like he's capable of anything in the realm of science, you know, so why not? But also we're getting the confirmation on Re-Destro's quirk here, and this is awesome. This is one of my favorite quirks in the series. It's just so cool what he's able to do here. So his quirk is stress. The more stress he builds up, he can convert to power, and the more he builds up, the bigger and stronger he becomes. I think that's awesome. But I also think it's showing us that my theory about the nanotech on him is very likely wrong, and that this black manifestation, this armament hockey that he has, is just a part of his quirk, and I guess this is the manifestation of his stress. And I suppose that this is also the quirk that Destro, you know, the original Liberation Army leader, this is probably what his quirk was, because when we see the flashback of Destro, what he looked like, he had like the Rorschach armament hockey type mask that Re-Destro has. And I thought that that was probably just like his villain attire, like the mask that he wore, you know, kind of like the costumes of villains and whatnot. And that Re-Destro was just paying homage to him by just copying his mask. But no, it seems like he just passed his quirk down to Re-Destro. That's pretty interesting. So then we come to the end of the chapter when we see the outskirts of Deka City, and we're reintroduced to Slide and Go, our friend that we haven't seen in a while. I think since like they first got into Deka City. And he's stopping like this van that's coming in, and he's like, no, there's a villain terrorizing the town. He even destroyed the town's landmark. And he's like sweating from it because of course he's worried because they thought this was going to be like a quick and easy job. But then suddenly it seems like an earthquake has started. So does this mean that our boy Gigantomachia has finally decided to enter the party? I think so, because before this they established that the tower had already fallen. So it's not that. And if anyone is capable of earthquakes, it's definitely Gigantomachia. And we see that, you know, Shigaraki is on the ropes against Re-Destro here, like in this final panel. So what a better time for Gigantomachia to join, as we assumed that he was going to come right at the last minute, you know, right when it seems that all hope is lost for Shigaraki. And it seems like this is a great opportunity for Re-Destro and Gigantomachia to go head-to-head. You know, like two Hulks going against each other, which we assumed was going to happen after the reveal of his quirk, and it's very likely we're going to see it now, and it is going to be awesome. I cannot wait to see the clash of these two superpowers. But also, like I said before, I don't think Gigantomachia is going to just absolutely defeat Re-Destro by himself. I think that would kind of take away from Shigaraki's development and journey here, but more or less, Gigantomachia is going to wreck stuff and likely take out the remainder of the, I don't know, 100,000 or so of citizens in the city. Also, an interesting thing that I thought of is I wonder if Twice can clone Gigantomachia. I mean, of course, it doesn't seem like he can right now because he doesn't have the measurements of him, or else don't you think that he would have cloned it by now? But, I wonder if we're going to see that in this arc. Like, just like 5 Gigantomachias, that would be incredible. But, you know, we'll see what happens. So that's the end of the chapter. Let me know what you think about this one in the comments. I had such a good time with this one, and I hope you did too. If you liked the video, please give it a like. I also have a Patreon. It gives you access to a weekly Q&A video that I do. And if you haven't already, please subscribe as well. Have a great day, everyone. I'll see you in the next one.